was just wondering that when we have, supposing the patient, the donor's right lobe weighs less than the other donor's left lobe.
Okay.
And you are placing the right lobe orthotopically and you are placing the left lobe orthotopically. So I'm just talking of the simplest case scenario. Because the gray matter is finding it a little bit difficult to.
Fair enough.
So how do you go about modulating the portal inflow? So does the dual lobe liver transplant entail that the larger liver volume should get more inflow? That is what you would think intuitively.
True. So we would not want to modulate the flow here. We would not want to modulate. If you're putting both the lobes, I would not want to do a portal inflow modulation.
No, what I'm asking is that suppose the right lobe which you have put orthotopically,
yes,
weight-wise is less than the left lobe which you put orthotopically.
Yes.
And we know that conventionally the portal inflow is directed
is much higher towards the right side.
More goes to the right than goes to the left. So in that situation, what would you do?
So we check. So what we normally do is with the ultrasound Doppler, we check the flow, how much it is per 100 gram of liver. And if it is much higher, you can actually, what we normally do is technically when you're doing the anastomosis, you don't leave that much graft. When you do the anastomosis, you don't leave that much area. But I have never faced this. But what I think, what you're asking me is that if you think that the left lobe steal or the left portal vein or the left lobe will not be able to steal the flow, it is the right lobe which will get the preferential. You can narrow down your left portal vein anastomosis. That is one. Second, you can try and put the tie across the left portal vein, whereby the flow or the right portal vein for that matter, where the flow will be less to the right lobe and it will go mainly to the left lobe in terms of volume.
Because in one of the post-operative studies that you showed, the left portal vein actually looked a little attenuated. So that was probably a CT scan you said was done six months later.
Correct.
Yeah, that would probably mean that the left lobe is not regenerating
that much. Yes. So what happens is, and as you also know, the whole idea of doing a partial lobe transplant is that once it crosses a certain period, the graft starts growing. And in one of the three cases, actually what we had, where we had a right and left lateral, the left lateral lobe eventually atrophied. The left lateral segment eventually atrophied, and it is the right lobe now which is functional. So after a certain period of time, the patient requires that 0.8 GRWR in the initial period, which is couple of weeks. And once that is passed, usually the patient is able to manage because there is regeneration of either of the lobes, and that takes over the eventual functioning.
The second question, Nimish, is that in south of India, we do have the privilege of having steady cadaver donations. I know that is something that is very rare to come by in North India. But what are your thoughts on a low GRWR and then performing a shunt if you feel that a low GRWR is likely to produce a small for size syndrome? Though all of this actually to me looks like more a topic for discussion than of practical importance. But we were collating our data about a couple of years ago, and we saw in our database that about 20% of patients were having a GRWR of less than 7. So it was between 0.6 and 0.7. And only in a handful of these patients we had done a shunt and left the shunt untouched at the end of the transplant. So what are your thoughts on that? So if you have someone with low GRWR, what about a shunt?
So you are absolutely right. Actually, we also analyzed our data, and we are probably coming out with a paper on the similar lines of small for sizes. How low can you go in GRWR? And every center, I think, will have a different opinion about this. But at our own center, when we analyzed our data, we also found the same figures what you are quoting. At 0.7 GRWR, the patients generally do well. And if the GRWR goes less than 0.7, these are the patients we will have some problem. And even in our series, in whom we accidentally ended up in having on table, sometimes though the CT calculation may be more than 0.8 GRWR, you may end up in a GRWR which is less than 0.8, maybe somewhere around 0.7 to 0.75. These patients still continue to do well with the lobe graft. Patients we have done inflow modulation. These cases, I personally feel that up to 0.7, we can actually go ahead with a single graft. But if you look at our other cases, all the three cases which we have all had GRWR of 0.686 on the CT scan. Hence, we were very skeptical whether we should go ahead with 0.6. And in one of the patients, the issue was rather than the GRWR who was stable, the HCC is generally stable, and we may go ahead with a 0.6 or a 0.65 GRWR because the stable patient with HCC generally tend to do good even with a smaller sized right lobe graft. So, but in that patient, the donor, both the donors which they came up with had a lower future liver remnant volume. The left lobe was smaller. If we had gone ahead with the right lobe in either of these two donors, we would not have gone ahead because in both cases the remnant volume was less than 30%. Hence, we went with a dual left lobe graft in that recipient. So answering your question, I hope, coming back to that, yes, we would accept a 0.7 also as a GRWR, but anything less than 0.7, we would be skeptical because the results in some cases are affected.
Right, because I think my take on this GRWR again is a little different one. So I don't think it is just the weight that matters. So probably there is much more to the weight of the recipient than what meets the eye. So you can have someone who's very lean and thin, in whom probably you need a higher GRWR than what one might be able to deliver by way of a good size graft also. And there might be someone who weighs a lot more and in whom even a smaller graft would suffice. So I think there is something in the patient phenotype which the physician should be able to get in touch with the surgeon and say and opine that probably you can get away with the lower GRWR. And I think there are a lot of physicians who have tuned in. And my last question before Sonal chips in. So you said one of the recipients developed rejection. So I am very intrigued. So if there is allograft dysfunction, so how do you diagnose with it?
So very true. I was anticipating because even we had a similar problem to find out now which lobe is actually rejecting. So we had to do biopsy of both the lobes to find out which lobe was actually rejecting. So yes, you are absolutely right but we had to do an ultrasounded anyway for an LDLT. It is an ultrasounded liver biopsy. So we had done biopsy of both the lobes.
Right, Dr. Sonal, you wanted to chip in. Please go ahead.
Yes, I think you covered two of the very critical points here. I think one point that I wanted Nimesh's comments on was, where does the dual lobe, what is the place of this today, given that we are, even by serendipity and by accident, we have discovered that we can actually go substantially below the GRWR levels that was said before. And now there's there are several centers that would safely do GRWR, so including our own of 0.6, 0.64, etc. With flow modulation techniques. And of course, as Dr. Dharmesh has very correctly put it, it's not just the absolute volume. The portal flow makes a very big difference, and portal flow per ml per kilogram or ml per 100 grams of liver makes a very big difference. So now that we understand this probably a little bit more than before, where does it fit in? I'm inclined to think that the second part of what you said is probably more accurate. It fits in more from a donor safety perspective. When you are not able to, absolutely ascertain that you have a 30% FLR for a recipient, for a donor. So in that case, a better way to look at it probably in the context of the donor rather than the recipient. I wanted your comment on that really.
So very true, Sonal. What Dr. Dharmesh Kapoor sir was also trying to point out is, we do not, in the recipient, we don't know how much is ascites. We don't try to remove the ascites. We don't look at the dry weight. The patient has got edema also. Some of our recipients do come with edema. So it is very difficult to say exactly only GRWR. And as you rightly pointed out, most of the centers now have realized that we can come down on the GRWR. We are happy with 0.7, and some centers, as you rightly said, 0.6, 0.65, they can go ahead with inflow modulation. And so the whole idea of putting this is, one, it is technically very challenging and difficult. You need to have good amount of expertise in living donor liver transplant before actually embarking on a dual lobe transplant. And third, which we have already, I think, discussed is, this is very important in your armamentarium, as if your liver volume in the donor is going to be less, the future liver remnant volume is less than 30%. Obviously, you do not want to subject your donor to any of this. and doing a left lobe hepatectomy is comparatively simpler, and in terms of morbidity and mortality, it is much less if you do a right lobe hepatectomy. So from the donor point of view, yes, I completely agree with you. This is probably much more indicated from the donor angle rather than a plain GRWR. So plain GRWR of 0.8 is no longer a sacrosanct, and we can come down to 0.7, 0.65, especially those patients who are stable either with HCC. These patients will do well with a low GRWR.
Dr. Nemish, there is a question in the Q&A box that if you are placing a left lobe, so you've taken 2 left lobe grafts, so how do you keep the one that you have placed in the right fossa? How do you keep it in place?
Yeah, so what we had done is the falciform ligament, which was there, we had stitched it to the diaphragm. I didn't notice that if somebody had noticed it, but we had taken the stitches, Prolene stitches in the video, which we didn't show it in the video, but the Prolene stitches were there. If you had noticed, the Prolene stitches were there on the left lobe, which was converted into a neo-right lobe. So that is what we'll keep in position. The Asan Medical Center actually puts a silicone graft and tries to create a space there. And again, we have done only one such case. I'm not sure how many are done across the country. I don't think many centers would have done a dual left lobe. So we did not find any issues with converting and just hitching it up to the diaphragm. And the as you can see, the scan which we showed 6 months down the line did not have any kinking of the vein. So the main issue here, why the left lobe has to remain in the position, is that your outflow should not be kinked. If there's an outflow kink, obviously there's an outflow obstruction, and that will lead to graft loss. So that is one of the major point where the position of the graft is important. So what we did is, as I said, we just stitched it and hitched it up to the diaphragm.
Dr. Ravi, any comments from your side, or Dr. Somnath, would you want to comment on anything?
Yeah, I have a question quick. So I was wondering, why would Asan do simultaneous reperfusion? Because is it because they do more fully clamping the Keva technique, or because your technique is possible, sequential is possible only if you don't fully clamp the Keva? If the simultaneous reperfusion will be probably a little faster, but then it will be, you'll have to clamp the full Keva. So what do you think? And so the second question is, why is it that Asan prefers doing dual lobes much more than doing shunts, which is not the preference of other centers?
Again, that question should be asked to Asan Center. But what I analyzed from what the data which they have said as, again, as you said, see, the 400 transplants they have done, which is about 11% of the living donor transplant, is dual lobe. 11% is a huge number if you look at the total number of volume living donor transplants they are doing. The second point is, as I agree with you, they probably clamp the full Keva and they prefer doing a simultaneous reperfusion. We can do a sequential. So what we did is, in the first one, we clamped the full Keva, and then did the reperfusion. We removed the clamp. The second, when we put the second lobe in, you don't actually need to do a full total cable clamping, and you can get away with a sequential. The whole idea of the reason we wanted to do sequential is, one, you wanted to analyze what has happened to the right lobe, what you have implanted. You do the Doppler, you take your time to do it, then you remove the left lobe graft, so thereby reducing the cold ischemia time of the second graft. So that was the whole idea of why we prefer doing a sequential. And then what now, from the data what I was looking at the Asan Medical Center, now what they are doing is dual lobe. They are preferring dual lobe more than the probably it's not only for the low GRWR. Now they are using a lot of grafts which has got hepatic steatosis to up to the tune of 70 to 80% of hepatic steatosis. So that was something which is surprising, and I'm not sure any of the centers in India would be brave enough to go ahead with use 2 grafts, both having 70% steatosis. So that is what I think Asan is doing at present, and they have shown good results with that. But I think I have my reservations, and I'm not sure if any other centers would be happy doing a 70% steatotic graft using 2 donors and putting it in the recipient and taking that step. So they have pushed the boundaries of a dual lobe. It is not only for the low GRWR now. They are actually using these grafts which are probably steatosis, and a single graft would not have been sufficient enough. A 70% steatotic graft would not be sufficient enough because as we all know, because of such high percentage of steatosis. That is why they are putting a second graft which is an additional graft which will help the patient to get a better functional hepatocyte volume. not with the steatotic volume. So I think the reason now what they are doing is because of steatosis, and their indications I think has changed than what the indication when they actually started doing a dual lobe transplant.
Dr. Somnath, yeah, please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. Yeah,
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So the anterior sector drainage, would you, if you do a conventional right lobe plus a left lateral, would you care too much about the segment 5, segment 8, anterior sector, just ligate it? Or if you would do it, then I mean, what would you think about? Because that's what we worry about now in living donors, the anterior sector a lot. And the second part of it is, as a routine, would you do a Roux-en-Y for the left side? Because the biliary complications have traditionally been high, even in the Asan paper, they have reported high stricture rate for that. So do you do, because the ones that, when I was in global, we had experience of 2, and the biliary complication was a problem in that.
So yes, I agree with. Now coming to answering your first part of your question is doing the anterior sector drainage. Fortunately, in the graph which we had on the right side, segment 5 and 8 were draining into RHV as well, and hence if you had noticed in the video, we did not reconstruct the middle hepatic vein. But in case you end up getting a graph which does not have any bit of drainage of segment 5 and 8 into the right hepatic vein, then just by putting volume wise a right lobe and a left lobe or dual graft is not justified, because in these cases your anterior sector has to be taken care of, the outflow has to be maintained for the anterior sector. So yes, you will have to reconstruct the middle hepatic vein. Segment 5 and segment 8 needs to be reconstructed, and outflow has to be provided. Otherwise, there's no point just by doing, for the heck of doing a dual lobe. You should not be going ahead and doing a dual lobe transplant in these cases. Coming to your second point of which you had raised is about biliary complication. The whole idea of doing in a dual lobe, you use the right duct. I mean, especially what we did in the dual left lobe is the right duct where the anastomosis is posterior. We prefer to doing duct-to-duct anastomosis there. Again, everybody would prefer doing a duct-to-duct, but easily accessible post-operatively in case you want to stent them and do. Now, in these cases, when these two lobes are far apart, when you're doing a dual lobe, it is difficult to get the biliary stumps so far and wide where you are able to do both the anastomosis to duct. So one of these anastomosis will have to be, unfortunately, with the Roux loop. Now, we try and see if possible one lobe you do duct and the other lobe you do left with a Roux loop. So in the dual left lobe, we thought doing a duct was a faster and a simpler process, because we wanted to complete the biliary anastomosis before actually going ahead with reperfusion of the before doing a portal vein anastomosis. So that saves time as well, and hence in the second we had used the Roux loop.
So Dr. Nemish, I think, and this is somebody who's put in a question, maybe it's from the MCure group only, this take on taking steatotic livers and trying to put the two grafts rather than one. I think the patient population that we are talking of is very different. So if you have got stable patients with HCC and you give them MELD exception points, all these things, they really don't stand out in the Asan publication. I know the whole surgical fraternity in our country vouches for Asan, but I have my own skepticism about what they say and what they do. I've never been to that center, and I might be branded as a skeptic, but anybody who tells that nothing happens after liver transplant, it's all hunky-dory and everybody goes home peacefully, that is not stating the truth. So if you are putting steatotic grafts 60-70%, then probably you are looking at patients who've got tumors. And I also saw, and this is something that I wanted to mention, and all for those who logged into this webinar, look at the time of surgery. So as a physician, what I would always request my surgical colleagues is to come out as quickly as possible. So if you are operating on a patient who's a high acuity patient, you should always try to reduce the anesthetic time. This never ever figures into our scheme of things when we are talking of outcomes post-transplant. So we talk about what is the volume, what is the anterior sector drainage, how complex was the anatomy, what all reconstructions did you have to do. So I can tell you that if you carefully monitor and manage your patients, for at least me, the most important thing has been a very quick surgery. So high acuity patients who got renal dysfunction going into transplant, they have AKI, you clamp the full cava, you do simultaneous reperfusion, I would not want to work with that surgeon. It's a very sweeping statement to make, but I would not want to do that, because at the end of the day, you're looking at the outcome. So you've subjected two normal people to come under the knife, and after that, if your patient goes on a filter and you have issues with allograft dysfunction, hell breaks loose. It's very easy to do all of these things when you're working in a teaching hospital, but when you are in the private sector, I think there's a lot more answering to do. Nevertheless, one cannot take away from this technical marvel, and it's obviously a huge surgical achievement, I would say. But I think one has to be very careful. Like I said right at the outset, for me, the most challenging thing in transplant has been the donor management. It's never the recipient management. Recipient is very sick. Many of the times you're transplanting people who are doomed to die, and you want to do the best for them. But anything happening to the donor is something that you cannot forgive yourself for. Thank you very much.
So I completely agree with you, because I have also not been to Asan Center. I have not visited that center. And I agree with you, because even I am not convinced of the hepatotic or the steatotic graft which is being used. And that is, but this was in answer to what Dr. Ravi had asked me that question, that why Asan is preferring dual lobe. So I personally also have reservations of using 70% steatotic graft. Well, dual lobe is out of question. 70% steatotic graft of a single donor also, as we have rightly pointed out, if the recipient outcome is not going to be good, all hell breaks loose, especially in India. It is not so easy. Hunky-dory, it is not so. Liver transplant is not a hunky-dory thing. The one disclaimer is that though we have been doing this transplant, technically we are performing. This does not mean that I ask my younger colleagues to just straight on jump to this. But at the same time, they need to be aware that such a thing is available in the armamentarium. And we are also a private institute, Dr. Dharmesh sir. So we are not only a government institute or a teaching institute, but yes, we have done in private. But if you have expertise, I think you can go ahead. But as said, there are a lot of things which you have already discussed, and the indications now have changed for dual lobe. So it is mainly for donor specific, you would want to go ahead, and steatosis, which Asan is using it, but I'm not sure we would want to go on that path.
And just on a more lighter note, when you read these papers on living donor transplant, so especially on donor evaluation, so this is one figure that is just stuck in my gray matter. So number of donors evaluated, 2.6. So this is a figure which hasn't changed since 2002, ever since one started to do transplants. And 2.6 means that you are probably evaluating 6 donors to get 2 grafts. I don't know where these donors are coming from, or that figure is wrong. I hand over the microphone now.
Dharmesh, I think Dr. Vikram Raut has joined or not, because he is also supposed to be one of the panelists. You have to give him a chance to ask anything or make a comment.
Dr. Vikram, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm there. I think I agree. Whatever the discussion has happened, the need of a dual lobe transplant we have to see in the context of availability of a cadaver donation. And now also, I think the dual lobe transplant were started maybe 10 years back, where everybody was thinking with GRW or GRWR, but we have learned a lot about the GRWR in last 10 years. So that's why that's the reason why the most of publications are coming, as Dr. Nemish rightly pointed. The most of publications are coming only from Assam, and it is not accepted in the rest of. It is not accepted in Japan. It is not accepted in Taiwan, and it is acceptability is very low in India too. So I think that's the way I think we have to look at it.
Thanks so much for your comments. I now hand over the microphone to Dr. S.K. Mathur for any closing comments.
Yeah. So I happen to be part of one of the dual lobe transplant with Mohammed Rela and Global. Now, it's a fascinating surgery, technically demanding, and should be done by a very experienced person only when it is absolutely indicated. What Dharmesh was trying to tell everybody, that one have to be very, very careful. Okay, though he went on to the other extreme of speed of the surgeon. Dharmesh, let me assure you that the speed of the surgeon is not equivalent to the post-operative recovery in any surgery. Okay, very fast surgeon can give you a mess in the post-op period. Okay, and a very slow surgeon can give you an excellent patient in the post-op period.
Yeah.
So the speed is not the thing. Yes, but it's a technically demanding. Should be done by very senior persons, and only the indications should be very hard-fought indications. not loosely created indication for doing a technically successful surgery. Right. So, are there any questions or anything? Then otherwise,
I think we have taken the question in the Q&A box. So I was thinking that this talk is going to take just 15 minutes, so that's why the third schedule Ravi's talk after this. So we now quickly go on to the next talk, and that is liver transplantation in COVID-B times. So we all know this virus, it's swept our planet, and that too with a vengeance, not showing any signs of letting off. And of course, when this virus first struck our shores, and this was sometime in the middle of March, we were all very skeptical whether we should continue transplant activity or not. But over a period of time, one realized that it was probably safe to proceed with surgery in a select cohort of patients after very careful monitoring of both the donor and recipients. And there are centers who have been doing transplants, I would not say with the same frequency as they were doing prior to March, but transplant activity seems to have picked up in the last few months.